What's going on? This is the Leafs Convo podcast. My name is Norman James. Thanks so much for being aboard for this episode. I have to ask, how do you listen to us? On YouTube, the YouTube channel is blowing up. It is banging. Make sure to like and subscribe to that channel if you haven't done so, by the way. What about Radio Public, iTunes, Anchor? However you're supporting this podcast with your ears and your minds, we appreciate it so much. Our good friend Mike Augello is standing by. He and I are going to discuss your reaction to our recent podcasts focused on the one and only Jake Gardiner. He is a pariah. He is a superstar. He is a polarizing figure. Why can't we all just come to terms on a general consensus for Jake Gardiner? Mike and I will discuss. Plus, one of his recent items focuses on the Leafs' bottom pairing defensive unit. Does it matter, or is it just as important as the top pairing, of which Jake Gardiner is most likely a part of? Mike's ready to go. I'm ready to go. I know you're ready to go. So what do you say? Let's pod. The Leafs Convo starts right now. And here he is, the newly minted mayor of Cheektowaga, New York, the Honorable Michael Augello. Hello, sir.
Good morning, Norman. Yeah, I don't even know if we have a mayor in Cheektowaga. It's such a small town that I think we have a town council.
A town council, and you're not running things down there?
No, not interested at all.
Yeah, just laying low, but you're certainly running things when it comes to hockey reports and hockey ideas. Mike, you're fantastic. We have so many people who traffic the YouTube page, Leafs Convo. Please subscribe. Do it right now. And so many of them are just impressed with everything that you are contributing to this project, and I am one of them. So thank you very much for that, Michael. Our latest, talking about different scenarios regarding Austin Matthews and his contract negotiations with the Maple Leafs. But we did get onto the topic of one Jake Gardiner, and of course, it's a very polarizing topic because you have a faction of fans who believe he is overrated. Mm-hmm. He's a bonehead. He makes big mistakes. He's a liability. And then on the other hand, you have a group of Jake Gardiner supporters who will point to the metrics and the data, and they will say, look, it's ironclad. You can't argue this. The Cat is one of the best defensemen in the league, and don't make judgments on his overall game and his contributions to the team based on that shit show of a Game 7 versus the Boston Bruins. So, Michael, a couple of days out from our last podcast, and obviously knowing what you know about Jake Gardiner, has anything changed from your end?
No, in fairness to the two camps as you described them, I think they're both right. In the sense that offensively, he's a 50-point defenseman. He had, I think, in the 40s the year before, and if he puts up another 50-point year, he's going to hit it big in free agency for teams that need an offensive defenseman. But as you termed, he's a disaster in his own end, and it was that coming of age year last year where he really stepped up was because Babcock was playing him in sort of protected minutes, not playing. Mm-hmm. First lines. Last year he did that less, and that showed. And obviously the disaster in Game 7 showed. So it's all a question with the Leafs regarding Gardiner is if they can get him signed for an amount that they think is reasonable, and if they can't, then he's going to leave. And it's a question of whether he's going to leave by trade or they're just going to let him walk. And I get the sense that they're not going to let anybody walk. If they can get assets for a player, they're going to trade the guy. So it's a question of if that's going to happen before the season, which is less and less likely because the summer is pretty much done in terms of big transactions, although you never know, or if it's going to happen closer to the deadline because they can rent him someplace else and get a good return. So, but we know that the Leafs are going to want to be competitive in the Cup, and giving up Gardiner at that point is not consistent. That's why I keep saying I think they're going to go out and get a defenseman, and if they do that, then maybe they can move Gardiner in a corresponding move.
This is the Leafs Convo. Norman James with Mike Augello. The idea that we are pushing potentially moving Jake Gardiner, considering what's coming up with his free agency, how much money he'll get paid, is propagated for the most part by the pipeline of defensemen the Leafs boast right now, and how many of them are playing in the mold of a Jake Gardiner. So it's not like you're going to be devoid of a puck-rushing, offensive-minded defenseman. You have several of them within the organization. And that is why we look at someone like Jake Gardiner, considering everything he's up against. We believe that he could bring back not a king's ransom, but something nice in terms of a transaction. My question, Mike, is why don't the Jake Gardiner supporters who really love the guy and who think he's all world and he should be untouchable, why don't they see it from this perspective? It's more about managing your assets properly as opposed to, pedestalizing a guy based on how much we like him and how much the spreadsheet says that he's fantastic.
I can't explain their viewpoint. I've never been someone, even as a fan going back in the day, who, other than a guy like Wendell Clark, and there's a reason that you put a Wendell Clark up on a pedestal because he was, a 5'11", 180-pound guy taking on 6'4" guys, beating them up, scoring goals. Yeah. He did everything, and if his body didn't give up on him, he would have been, I believe, a Hall of Famer. But Jake Gardiner, I'm not saying Jake Gardiner is not a good player. I think the people who have, I've gotten feedback on regarding Gardiner says, you just hate him because of this. I'm like, no, I don't hate him at all. I just think that he is a sort of a one-dimensional player, and he's 27 going on. I think he turned 28. And at 28 years old, you are what you are. And I don't think that there's going to be some sort of renaissance or some sort of eureka moment where all of a sudden he's going to become Rod Langway. He's not a good defensive defenseman. His defense is his ability to carry the puck and counterattack the other way. But, in certain instances when the team that's attacking you and he is in the zone, that's a problem. And I think, a key – as you mentioned regarding development of players, is going to be Travis Dermott in his sophomore year being able to take on some of the responsibilities of Jake Gardiner. He's going to start on the bottom pairing. If he moves up into a top four role, or if Mike Babcock thinks he's capable of moving up into a top four role, then I think the likelihood of Gardiner being traded happens.
This is the Leafs Convo. Norman James with Mike Augello. Please subscribe to our YouTube page. We are rocking and rolling every time Mike and I collab and put another podcast on wax. We lose subscribers based on our opinions of Jake Gardiner, which aren't really that stark or that controversial. He's a fantastic player. And if the Leafs want to keep him in the fold for the rest of his career, possibly, then go for it. The question is, how are you going to get support for him? The way this defense is constructed right now, there are too many flaws in it to support a Stanley Cup run at this point. Clearly the team is destined for another 100-point season. They're going to score a whole bunch of goals, but it doesn't matter how much offense you have. At some point, you're going to need to batten down the hatches. And as you mentioned, if Jake Gardiner has a eureka moment somehow in summer hockey and it all clicks for him and the guy becomes the best two-way player in the league, that would be incredible, but that would be almost miraculous because based on his track record, we shouldn't expect that. So I would say to the people who love Jake Gardiner, this has nothing to do with the fact that he's a statistic wonder boy. He needs support back there defensively. How are the Leafs going to get that other than moving out an asset that they have a surplus of? And the asset that you would move out of his ilk would either be a Jake Gardiner right now, or you would move out some of the younger players who are forming into the mold of a Jake Gardiner. And that would be also a contentious issue. We don't hate Jake Gardiner. We just want to see this team win a Stanley Cup. And if that means move Jake Gardiner out for a better defensive player who can support the younger Jake Gardiner 2.0s coming up through the pipeline, then by golly, you have to go ahead and do it.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see. And like I said, the most interesting thing to track will be the progress of Travis Dermott. I think the other thing that will maybe indicate that there is some let's just say this. I have talked to some people who believe that one way or the other, this is Jake Gardiner's last year in Toronto. It's not etched in stone, but I believe that to be the case with the impending extension of Austin Matthews with what Mitch Marner could earn on a new deal next summer with Nylander getting signed. I just don't think, based on what I think Gardiner will make in free agency next summer, they can afford Jake Gardiner. So that's why I think this is his last year.
One of your latest articles, Mike, is also focused in on the defense, but not necessarily the top end of the core, but the back end of the core. And let's be honest, every single position on a hockey team right now, especially one with championship aspirations, is important. And you know, when it comes to Maple Leaf fans and their love of team and their interest in every aspect of that team, the bottom pairing of the defensive unit is just as talked about as the top pairing, Mike.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's accepted that the top four right now is etched in stone going into training camp: Riley and Hainsey, Zaitsev and Gardiner, and more than likely, unless he just really has a terrible training camp, that Travis Dermott will be on the bottom pairing. It's a question of, you know, who the other person will be and who the usually one or two defensemen will be in reserve. And I looked at the situation, and, you know, right now the assumption is that Connor Carrick will be the bottom pairing right D alongside Dermott. But, you know, Connor Carrick has been with the Leafs for, well, now like 2.5 seasons, and really hasn't locked in a position. He's been like the seventh defenseman. He's played off and on. I mean, he played more last year than this most recent season. And I mean, there are openings here. And as I wrote yesterday for Hockey Buzz, you know, I chronicled, you know, Justin Hall and Rosen and Andreas Borgman and Igor Ozaganov and even Martin Marincin as options. And I don't think that Marincin is a realistic option, because I think the organization has finally come to the realization that he's just not an NHL defenseman. But, you know, there is some flexibility there because Dermott has played right defense. Rosen has played right defense in the SHL. So if it was a lefty that makes the team, they could move over and have somebody play on their offside. But, you know, I can't say who's got the inside track. I think, like I said, I think because he's a veteran, more experienced, you know, Carrick will have the first chance. But what happened last year is what I think is going to happen this year. You're going to have sort of a extended, you know, look at a lot of these guys. They're going to carry probably 8 defensemen, and I think Babcock is going to rotate Borgman, Rosen, Carrick, Ozaganov, you know, rotate them in and out of the lineup and decide which one he likes. And then maybe by the midpoint of the season, he tells Kyle Dubas, I need somebody else, or I can go with this guy. But it's really going to be an evolving process.
If the bottom end of the defensive core is an experiment, you have to believe the top end must be ironclad, Mike.
And that's where I struggle, because you know, my reservations regarding Gardiner are well known, but I'm actually a believer that Nikita Zaitsev will bounce back. A lot of people aren't. A lot of people soured on that deal after last year, but there were injury considerations and other things off the ice that I think were factors, and I think he will bounce back. And it was his sophomore year in the NHL, and we know sophomore slumps are reality because it happens a lot. My main area of consideration and concern is Ron Hainsey. After playing all the minutes he played last year, after playing penalty killing as much, he seemed to wear down at the end of the year, and I can't see this team not relying on that defensive pairing as a matchup against other top lines. I think the most solid move would be being able to move Hainsey down to that bottom pairing, maybe pair him with Dermott if they get that defenseman that they're looking for. But that, again, we don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. Ron Hainsey should be nowhere near the top pairing on a team like the Maple Leafs that aspires to win a championship this coming season.
I agree, and also I did leave out that Morgan Rielly has played the offside as well. So if there is a trade out there for a left-hand shot defenseman, or if they wanted to go after a Tobias Enstrom or somebody like that who are still out there as agents, they could move that around. I mean, there is some flexibility. I do know that Mike Babcock at one point in Detroit had 6 left-hand shots on the line. So it right now is, can you add in a 1-year window, which they have with all this cap space, can you add somebody without giving up somebody else that can help this defense? There are probably still a few options free agency. There might be a few options in trade. Then that's going to be the question that continues to be asked to Kyle Dubas probably throughout the year.
I hope the consensus is that the Leafs defense is a work in progress and has too many warts at this point to be considered an elite defense and one that can backstop a team to a Stanley Cup championship. And the question I would ask people who want to see Gardiner shipped out and those who want to see Gardiner's bronzed and added to the Legends row, what do we need to do right now to make this defense better? Is it all about just developing more Jake Gardiners and having a bunch of 51s running around out there? Or if you think this team needs to be defensively sharper and defensively more astute, how do you go and do that for this season? How do you go and make those alterations to the defensive unit right now? How do you do that? And if you think you can do that and keep number 51, then I want to hear it.
And you notice the name that I didn't mention, all the names that I listed off, and it was Timothy Liljegren, because I am fairly convinced that this organization is looking at this season as another developmental year for Liljegren, where he's going to stay with the Marlies, probably see an increased role, probably go to the World Junior in Vancouver and Victoria in December and play for Team Sweden and get top 3 minutes. And maybe at the end of the year, if they think he's matured enough, maybe they bring him up and give him a look. But I don't think that they're relying on Liljegren as an option with the Leafs, and they're just going to use this again as a developmental season.
Yeah, I hate the way these players become divisive icons that split the fan base up. It's the analytics crowd versus just the hockey fan crowd. And I mean, we're all hockey fans. I think we all want to see the team win. I think sometimes I look at the analytics crew and I think they just seem to like players more than they like the team, right? When are we going to get into an argument over who's better, Austin Matthews and John Tavares, and the analytics crowd is pulling out numbers to support
it's coming.
Austin Matthews? He's the best, and John Tavares isn't really that good.
It's coming.
You know, when
it's coming. I think there's always been a divisive quality in fan bases. You know, I mean, I can remember, back in the Yankees days, Mantle or Maris, or who's the best this, who's the best that. It's like, is Derek Jeter or is A-Rod better or whatever. I mean, that I think that's natural. It's only in the last few years has it come to analytical or non-analytical. And with Gardiner, it's like, to me, he is proof that numbers alone are not an accurate indicator of the quality of a player, because based on the numbers, Gardiner is supposed to be great, and he is good. He is not great, and he never will be great if he doesn't improve defensively, and I don't think that's ever going to happen.
If Kyle Dubas could 3D print Scott Stevens in his prime and put him beside Jake Gardiner, great. But Jake Gardiner is on an island. He needs defensive help that only he can get, and the only way he can get that is to be transacted in a trade. And I just don't. He's either going to be here, and this team is going to continue to have its flaws, or you're going to use him to go and get what you're looking for, bring that piece back, and have the Jake Gardiners who aspire to fill the role of 51 elevate their game, and then you might have another argument over whether this team is offensive-minded or not. Mike, we got to go.
Thanks, Norman.
You've got to love that Mike Jello. His wisdom and insight when it comes to the Maple Leafs is second to none. We appreciate his involvement in this little project we call the Leafs Convo podcast. And a big thank you to you for supporting what we are doing. Nearly 1,200 subscribers on the YouTube channel, 50,000 downloads on our podcast platforms, all in the span of less than 4 months. It's an incredible thing. Do you have any constructive criticism for us? Comments, ideas, things you'd like to see on future episodes of TLC? Get at us through the YouTube comment section. We'll read what you have to say, we'll process it, and put your plans, your hopes, your dreams, your wishes for the podcast into motion. For Mike Jello, I'm Norman James. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.